Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking around. And I know we'll have a few more joining us, and a couple of our previous panelists are still hovering around. So do find some time to connect with them and their immense expertise. I had the good pleasure of interviewing my friend, Mr. Michael Kennedy. Michael is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Intuit, which is you just heard all about Intuit, but a global technology platform that helps individuals achieve financial confidence and powers prosperity around the world. They have some of the iconic brands like TurboTax and MailChimp and QuickBooks that I'm sure you all have heard of. I've been using TurboTax for like 25 years myself. Won't change. It's just too easy, frankly. It's just too good. But he has an immense experience in the private sector. He used to work on Capitol Hill, was a senior aide to Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, has had leadership roles at VMware and Walgreens Boots, and also teaches a course on public affairs at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And so I wanted to pick his brain a little bit about his course that he teaches at Howard, but also, share a little bit about what Meridian does in this space as well with all of you, and have a little slide deck that we'll go through a little bit after I'm done grilling Michael with some questions here. So, Michael, in your view, what is the importance of teaching corporate diplomacy skills to private sector executives as well as university students?
Sure. Well, thanks for having the conversation. We start our class. I teach it with a person who also does a similar job for Adobe, and we start our class every semester with a question that I would ask everyone here too, which is, how many of you think lobbying is bad or part of the problem? Yeah. So we've got hands in there, and but why? So his answer was that lobbyists are often characterized as pushing an agenda that is against the social good, and I think that's generally the answer we get with our class as well. Is that they hear the word lobbyist, they hear and they think big pharma, big oil, big something that is against what people need or want, and what I found, and I am a registered lobbyist, right? But my boss at Intuit can't even say the word lobbying without doing the air quotes. She's like, "Yeah, I know that we're doing some lobbying with this, but," and I was like, "Why are we calling it lobbying instead of just lobbying?" Because I work for the general counsel, and they all complain about, "Oh, no one understands lawyers. No one understands lawyers." And it's like, well, try being a lobbyist, right? If you want to go into a room where like no proud mother says, "My son, the lobbyist," right? But why not, right? And what is the purpose for this? And so we go into in this course, why is this an important field? Why isn't it an important right? And where does, at least in the United States, where does lobbying come from? And where does this right come from? Is it a right? Is it a privilege? What is part of the process? And in the U.S., this is a part of the First Amendment to the Constitution. So this is where the granddaddy rights exist, with freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and then the freedom to petition your government for a redress of your grievances. And so that, for the founders of the United States, was so important that they didn't have a way to go to government and say, this ought to change. And it wasn't a right and a freedom. And so similarly, we talk about this in the class, is that, yes, are there corporations who are going to be arguing about things that you may disagree with? Absolutely. But do you also, and we asked them the same question, do you have a lobbyist working for you? And they're like, no, of course not. I'm not an oil company. I'm not a pharma company. I'm not whatever it is. And then we go through the trade associations, the unions. And in fact, we go through, I teach at Howard, which is a historically black college and university based in Washington, D.C. And we go through the HBCU benefits and programs, and we show all the entities that are lobbying on their behalf. And then we say, okay, how many of you are from Chicago? And someone will raise their hand. I was like, well, here's the Cook County Sanitation District that is a registered lobbyist. So if you live in Chicago and you flush your toilet, that's your lobbyist right there. And so we go through all these discussions about how does this work and how is it important. And in a corporate sense, I think it is important to have that voice learned and heard. And do the oil companies have constituencies? Yes. I mean, maybe they are arguing for things that you don't agree with. But there are also other things and other voices on the other side, and it's the trade associations, and it's the unions, and it's the other nonprofit organizations that do lobby and have that voice in government. And I think having come from the other side and hearing that and trying to understand what you don't know as a policymaker. Having that lobbyist voice and having different lobbyist voice is really important.
That's a great point. I'll add a international perspective. I used to work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the largest lobbying group in the world by magnitudes. And I was stationed out in New Delhi, India. And one thing they told me when I was moving out, shipping out to Delhi, was never use the L word or the A word, advocacy, or any of these terms have negative connotations in different contexts because in other countries it's not as formalized a system. There aren't the levels of disclosures that the U.S. companies need to go to. There isn't Foreign Corrupt Practice Acts or foreign registration requirements, and so it's different in different it's different in different contexts depending on where you are in the world. In the U.S., for better or for worse, has it very systematized and legalized, and it's a very robust ecosystem also.
Of the First Amendment rights, it is the heaviest regulated in the U.S.
Talk to me a little bit about what does corporate affairs or government affairs, and how does that aid in the formation of policy?
Yeah, again, I think the ability to carry a voice or a message of what policy can and can't do, I think is important. And again, what we teach in this class is that you can go in and you can kind of maybe once, maybe twice get away with pulling a fast one, and slipping something past the goalie or whatever it might be. But we teach about this kind of virtuous cycle of advocacy, and that you have your own interests, you have your constituency, your customers or your clients' interests, and then you have the policymakers' interests. And if you break any part of that circle, then you will quickly be ousted from the process. And so always remembering not only your own interests, but the people you represent and the policymakers' interests. And part of what we do in forcing our students to think about this is we have them write a paper and say, okay, advocate for this issue. And it could be a environmental issue or a social justice issue or even a business issue. And then we make them write this paper. And in the paper, we say, you have to tell us why people may hate your issue. And they will usually throw in a paragraph or two that's throwaway. And then the next paper, we make them write the other side of it and take the opposite perspective and understand and advocate just as zealously for it. And I think that a good advocate will go in and say, yes, this is what I want for my business, or this is what I want for, whatever I'm pushing for. But you should know that there is this constituency that disagrees with me. And this is why I think you should still do it, despite the disagreement. But being able to educate kind of in a 360 perspective is really important.
That's great. What are the sort of the trends that you're seeing in this profession? I know a lot of times folks with the same title as yours get ESG tacked on, you get sustainability tacked on, you get, you have pressures from your C-suite, you have pressures from your employees, from your clients, from your customers. Talk to me a little bit about the evolving nature of the role itself.
Yeah, I think, probably, and we talked about this a little bit in the last panel, probably 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was, I know a guy, we golf together, and I can probably get them to do something, right? Those days are over, right? And relationships matter, but it's not who you know, it's what you know. And the who you know is important, but they're born out of the process of what you know. And so I think more and more this role and this function is turning into something that is an audit committee relevant position, right? And for all of you who have boards that have audit committees, they're going to be thinking about risk and smart risk. And what is the risk if we do this for government regulation? How are my customers going to react if we do this? Can I take care of my employees to do all things? And so I look at this as a view of, listen, I'm thinking about the things that an audit committee on the board is going to be thinking about, and how do I take that risk and notch it down and be able to make it so that we're covered, whether it's ESG, whether it's DEI, whether it's just policy and regulation in general, all the things that the board level is going to be thinking of as a risk. How do I take those issues and encapsulate them and have a strategy behind them?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the panelist we just had, Wendy Black from Business Council, she said it best. It's not about going to the top dog or top minister in your portfolio. It's really understanding what is in everybody's own self-interest to do, and aligning those self-interests is really the art of this position. I think in many ways, and relationships are important, but figuring out how to move everyone's needle at the same time is really the art of it. What are some of the questions that students ask you in this course? Like, what are some of the common things that you get? I mean, that was a great back and forth you had with this gentleman, but curious about other.
Yeah, listen, by the end of the course, we asked the same question. And we put up a big thing on the PowerPoint that says, like, lobbying is bad, right, at the beginning. And we say, how many of you agree with this? And, probably 90+% of the class raises their hand and says that it's bad. By the end of the course, it's probably 20%. And still, I think some of them think that, it still feels wrong. But I think they understand a little bit more the process. And I think what we help them appreciate is that within lobbying and within kind of the advocacy world, it isn't just, Gucci wearing corporate types who are going in to apply influence and give bribes or whatever it might be. But there are organizations, there are infrastructures, and it's about education, and it's about advocacy for issues. And so whether it is the non-for-profits and the NGOs, whether it's the trade associations and the unions, or whether it is corporate kind of affairs, internal people, that there is a large landscape of where people can get involved and be part of that process. And that policymakers, again, are, the good ones, are looking for information. And so how do you then become part of that information ecosystem? And so I think, the beginning of it is, the questions are, how do you sleep with yourself at night and all that kind of stuff. But by the end, it's kind of like, well, how do I get involved in that? And how do I, how can I be doing this? And I think there becomes an enthusiasm for the larger ecosystem of impacting policy.
We both have a lot of friends who were lobbyists for abortion rights or maternal health access or for clean energy. AARP is the largest association in the world. It's the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. And they advocate on behalf of senior citizens, and what seniors need in this stage of their life. So it's not just one side of the coin.
Yeah, and we talk about, like, we put up Tesla versus the auto dealers, right, and the Automotive Dealer Association, and how are these models being disrupted, or the realtors versus Zillow, and we'll talk about how those models are being disrupted. And the AARP example we use, and my co-teacher is just like a few years older than I am, and he's qualified for AARP, so we give him a hard time for that. But we also talk about how, really they represent, retired people, but they have this very small niche of how do they provide this, what they call Medigap insurance that goes kind of for a health insurance between a certain level of where Medicaid and Medicare in the United States covers them and not, and where they came out super strongly at first against Obamacare. And people are like, well, wait a minute, how can seniors be against this? And it was because this little tiny, huge amount of money that was a nuance that they had to change. And how do these, how does the interests of everyone over 50 in the United States get tied into that? And having been again in the Senate and on the other side of this, and hearing the opposition from an AARP or hearing the opposition from a group of small businesses, when you're planning legislation and you're trying to roll it out and gain support, it is so hard to pass legislation and to get regulation through that even the smallest entity's objection, and with Twitter or X or whatever it is now and social media, the ability for a small entity to have a magnified voice, you want to avoid all of that. So we would track tweets from anybody about the things that we were doing, the bills that we were putting in, and we paid attention to the voices, small and big, on that side.
And you've also been lobbied.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about that when you were in the Senate working for the famous Senator Orrin Hatch. What was that interface? What did you learn in those years when you were on the government side?
Yeah, I had the benefit of being a lobbyist before I was a staffer, and so I'd been on the other side of the table. And Orrin was terrific in that, his view was we're here to help everyone. But I think he was also the senator from the state of Utah. And so it was, how do we, yes, we want to help everyone, but how do we help Utahns first? And so, I think being able to sit on that other side of the table and know that you have some influence, but then be able to say, how can I help? And trying to figure out how to get to yes. And what I would say is that 90+% of policymakers are trying to help and are trying to get to yes. And if there is a policy or if there is a situation that is hurting entrepreneurship or business development or things like that, they want to understand that, because their whole, they're not in it to become rich, right? They're in it to make a difference. And if they can use the powers that they have, the power to convene, the power to influence, the power to introduce legislation or regulation, I think they want to hear how that is going to impact the people on the ground, the people who are going to be the recipients of that policy. And so looking as broadly as you can for those voices. But the problem that I had on that side of that table is that, it is a constant deluge of information. And it was thousands of emails a day, hundreds of requests for meetings and things like that. So in a perfect world, I could sit down and have an hour and think, oh, wow, I wonder how this is going to really impact the small business that I met last month or whatever, and think through that. But you're just so deluged with the incoming that you don't have the luxury to sit down and think those big thoughts and think through those processes. And so for you to be that voice and that presence is important, because if they don't have the time to think through, and so you need to be part of that constant deluge and figure out how you can separate the signal from the noise and be signal within the noise. So he asked if there are tips on that. I think the answer is organization. First of all, it's consistency. You can't show up once, deliver the message, and expect that that's going to permeate and become part of the firmament. So I think you want to be able to have a consistent relationship and a trusted relationship where there's a back and forth. Think about what they need. Think about the information they need and how they need to consume it. And so instead of, sending them a book, sending them a one-pager, right? And here are the salient points, and this is why it is. Organize, go in as a coalition, join a coalition, join a trade association, and be able to kind of take that voice and distill it to the things they care about. Also, make sure that it's a conversation rather than a recitation of talking points, because you may go into a meeting or into an interaction with a staffer, and once again, if you capture the staff, you generally capture the policymaker. Because the policymakers have to know everything about everything, and those staffers are the ones that are going to become their experts. But the staffers also have to know everything about everything, and they're dealing with, hey, here are the thousands of bills or pieces of legislation or whatever that are being introduced, and so here are the salient points. But listening to what they're talking about and how they're talking about it, and say, oh, I recognize that you care about this issue. Here's how this kind of policy or this kind of thought or this kind of information is going to impact the things that you care about. So make it a dialogue instead of just I'm coming in, I need to make sure I have these 3 points made. Make the 3 points, but make sure you're listening and adapting to that point, because I think that's where the magic can happen.
It is definitely an exercise in education, in communication, and also you need to have a high EQ for this job. IQ alone will not cut it. You need the emotional quotient as well to really connect with people and understand what their equities are.
But
as well.
ask. I mean, it's surprising how few people are like, well, I can't bother them. They're really busy, and it's like, well, but like that's their job. Their job is to meet and hear your voice, and so be that voice and show up. And like we were saying in the last panel, like 50% of life is showing up, and it's probably more like 80%,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And so be there, be a constant presence. Don't be a nuisance, but make it a real relationship, a trusted relationship.
So we focus on advocacy. I know we only have about half an hour left here. So let's move towards diplomacy a little bit. In your mind, what is effective corporate diplomacy? What are ways in which the private sector can and should influence foreign policy?
Yeah, listen, there are very few entities that aren't multinational, even if they're small entities, right? And the way that the global supply chain is created, the way that the global policy environment is there, the way that extraterritoriality of certain regulations in certain areas trickles over into others, especially if you're dealing with data or other things like that, and who's not, right? And so understanding the nuances of where a regulation can show up in one area that can impact your ability to operate and function in another is important. And then I think finding again some of those local voices and local understandings to say, hey, listen, coming in the front door like this may work in Washington D.C., but it may not work in Tokyo, right? Or it may not work someplace else. And so having those nuances, and it's hard because that becomes expensive, and it becomes just resource prohibitive. But again, I think there are entities and institutions that you can join where at least you can start understanding what the waterfront looks like and saying, okay, I at least have the information of these 100 points. This may be the one point that isn't the most existential to my business. And so I want this association or trade association or body or whomever it is to be able to carry that point of view and that voice. And like we mentioned, embassies are a terrific resource, and that there are people sitting in embassies worldwide, no matter what country you're from, whose job it is to promote the corporate welfare of their own countries. And whose job it is to take your voice and your point of view to those, host nations and where they are. And so don't be afraid to, like it is to go talk to policymakers. Don't be afraid to go talk to the embassy staff, because their job is to help you do these things and to carry that voice in there. And it is I think a terrifically underutilized resource.
I agree. So without further ado, I know there's some questions in the audience. Are there questions right now that you'd like to please?
I actually wanted to emphasize on that last point that you were talking about, like not being scared of talking to people. Basically, this is one of the challenges that I'm actually meeting right now, and especially when it comes to policymakers and embassies and everything, I would like to know if you have some tips on what are the things to avoid or what are the things to actually scared to say like the wrong thing at the moment.
Yeah. So the question was, what are the things not to say when engaging with a policymaker or something like that? Listen, I think. Yeah, I wish I knew what not to say half the time too, and I think there's always a risk in that, and sometimes if the issue is big enough for you, and the regulation or the government interaction, if you're selling to the government, if you're doing things like that, and it's key to your business, that's probably the moment where you want to hire a professional. And just like you wouldn't go into a courtroom without a lawyer, if it's that important, if you're, maybe if you're fighting a traffic ticket, you can go in by yourself and fight the traffic ticket. If you're being charged with murder, you probably want someone who knows the ins and outs of how the court works and has those relationships. I think similarly, if your interaction with government is a traffic ticket level, then yeah, go in and do and work and build those things. If it is hey, this is life or death, then hire the person who knows exactly what to say and what not to say. And that's easy for me to say hire somebody because it is expensive. So I think that's part of it. I think the other side is always tell the truth.
That is exactly the point that I wanted to ask you about because I'm a pretty straightforward person, and sometimes this is like taken as like maybe the wrong thing to do at that moment when you are like actually trying to sell something to someone or trying to.
Listen, I don't be insulting. She said she's straightforward and is at a risk. Don't be insulting, of course, and don't say this is your policy is the dumbest idea I ever heard of. Like it may be, but there probably is a nicer way to say that. But I also think tell them the truth, right? Tell them what they need to hear. Tell them the other side of that. Tell them who might disagree with you, and tell them why they still should do what you want. Because I think if you go in even on that side of telling a half truth, and they said, well, I was told by this, entity that everyone loved this and this was the greatest thing ever, and then I found out that there were, a huge coalition against this, and I feel burned. Your credibility the next time is in there, and I think what this business is this is the bridge building business, and you even may be fighting against somebody, and those are the hardest meetings when you're going in to say this is why you're wrong. And this is why we oppose what you're doing. But I think if you're telling them the truth and you're telling them why, there's always another day. So if you're in the bridge building business rather than the bridge burning business, you never know when that relationship of, listen, we were adversaries before a couple years ago, but now we're working together on a bill, and there is always another day, right? And so if you were straightforward upfront from the beginning, the ability to go back in and work with them on another issue is better. And we hit this all the time where we have in the United States, we have a tax product, and there are some people who just hate it. Right. And because no one likes doing taxes. And so we're a for-profit company that helps people do taxes. Right. And so it's, like I can beat up on taxes and for-profit companies and corporations and all things at the same point and blame the lobbyist. Like this is a political trifecta. Right. I can win. But if I can say to that person, listen, we're going to agree to disagree on taxes, but let me come in and tell you what we're doing for small businesses in your state or in your district or in your community. And let's just set this issue aside and talk about where we can help each other and how we can move forward. There is a certain virtue in that. It's not easy, but I think it's important to kind of continue to build those bridges.
My thing is I don't think people like to be criticized in front of their superiors or their bosses, so that's one thing to avoid. And it's typically, most of the work, like I think was alluded to earlier, gets done at the staff level. So really focusing in and building relationships at the staff levels is typically more productive than trying to become the minister's best friend.
Well, and to your point about not being criticized in front of your boss, I think one of the reasons, honestly, I have a job in tech on this side of the table is when I was in the inside, we had a tech staffer who was very aggressive and kind of felt the power of being a government official, and he would yell at everyone. And people would come in with their CEO, and he would just berate them in front of their CEO. And so I would get a call from the lobbyist afterward and being like, "Hey, I need you to fix a relationship because, the staffer yelled at my CEO again." And I'd be like, "Great, have him come in." And then we'd come in and have time, like, "No, we're here to help." And I'd smooth things over. And so I was able to kind of be this salve on the burn that he would give afterward. And I think because of that, I was able to build the relationships, and it's probably why I have a job in tech today.
So there'll be some more time for Q&As. Let me just go through a couple of slides here. So the organization that I work for and Michael and Simeon are part of is the Meridian International Center. We implement the International Visitor Leadership Program for the U.S. Department of State. And this is a program that brings rising leaders from all over the world to the United States for these short 2 to 3 week exchange programs. There's no application process for this. You have to be nominated by U.S. Embassy abroad. Typically, your nomination constitutes your advancing some kind of diplomacy goal for that embassy in that country. The cool statistic is that we have over 180 heads of state who have passed through our program in the past. So Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, Nicolas Sarkozy, Anwar Sadat, Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, the former PM from New Zealand, the current Secretary General of the UN, the current SG of NATO are some of our notable alumni. The underlying statistic to this, since we were going deep, is 180 heads of state, and Thatcher and Gandhi are big names, but there's 30,000 cabinet level officials that have come out of this program as well. And going to the point before about who actually gets the job done, it's typically the cabinet, not the head of state. So I wanted to just frame a little bit about corporate diplomacy for all of you. And here's the landscape. The landscape is the world continues to get smaller, business opportunities grow larger, and the geopolitical landscape is increasingly complicated. And the pandemic created some new trading partners, new bedfellows, some rivalries. There's stronger economic competition. Obviously, there's the great power battle that's happening between the U.S. and China right now, but that involves everybody around the world, and it has third order effects on almost everything. There's new emerging technologies like AI. There was something unthinkable happened last year with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's so many things that are happening right now. It's hard to get a pulse on exactly where you should focus your energy and what's really salient to your business at this time. So in a time when geopolitics is increasingly driven by nationalism, and that's another, I'll just say it, worrying trend around the world, blaming the failures of globalism, the displacement done by technology, we need more bold and ethical corporate diplomats who are trained and prepared and resourced, not only to engage on the interests of their company, but also of all of society. And that's really the role of the corporate diplomat. And so the need for corporate diplomacy is, the basic theory is this, and some of you were in the previous session, so apologies for the repetition. But the basic theory is this, that as a business in the year 2023, in the 21st century, you are looking to sell beyond your borders. You are looking to expand your business. Whether you're in stealth mode, Series A, you're Series D, you're eyeing an exit, whatever it might be, you're a major corporation like Intuit, you are increasingly needed, and it is required for you to have your own foreign policy. What happens to your company if China invades Taiwan tomorrow? What do you need to, who do you need to call? What do you need to do? What happens if, God, heaven forbid, and I even hate to say this word, but what if there's another novel coronavirus? What have we learned from the last pandemic is that we need to have those relationships built in. You can't wait for that oh shit moment to really start thinking about, how is my supply chain going to be fixed? What am I going to do? How am I going to play my employees? How am I going to move my employees? How am I going to keep my own business safe from other external events? And so if you are a company that has global ambitions, that's looking to sell beyond your borders and operate internationally and be a responsible player, you need to have your own foreign policy. And to execute that foreign policy, you need to have executives in your company who can think and act and speak and react and negotiate and all those good things that diplomats do. The diplomatic skills are ever more salient and needed in private sector, especially in that good interface that private sector and government should have, because they really are two pieces of the same pie. And so to succeed in a global business environment, you need to have all of these different skills and strategies that that you see in the screen in front of you. Let's see. So some of the important aspects of corporate diplomacy are, having behavioral skills critical for international stakeholder engagement. I'm curious, Michael, if you have a thought on that, just that point right there, the behavioral skills needed for that global government engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes kind of the earlier
Yeah.
question of what not to say and what to say. I think the other side is it can't be an afterthought, and it needs to be part of the strategy built into it. And I think that if your C-suite can be thinking through, okay, where do I fit in here? How would I talk about this? If I had 10 minutes with the minister right now, what would I ask for? And how is this, a relevant question that only they can fix? And if I'm asking them to fix something, what would I want them to fix? Or if I could wave that magic wand for the government, what would be the one thing that I would ask them to do? And then figure out that that strategy around that. I think also more and more people are recognizing that business leaders are the trusted entities in a lot of society now, and you see the polling where people are trusting and relying on business leaders to be the moral voice, to be the stability within society. And so, how do you project that and take that role of what is your mission and what is core to what you're doing, and how do you take that trust that people have in you and carry it forward, so you're not trying to be everything to everyone all at once, but that, hey, as a business leader where I have a certain amount of trust from the people in front and in the ecosystem, this is going to be my thing, and it's going to benefit me, it's going to benefit my employees, it's going to benefit my customers, and that's going to be the thing that I do now. And I think that voice is really important, and I think policymakers recognize it, that that they're not super trusted right now, and that trust in institutions is decreasing, not increasing globally. And so how do you as an entrepreneur and a business leader help fill that gap?
I think that's such a great point. I'm surprised I missed that. The trust in institutions, as we all know, is eroding. The trust in the media, trust in government, etc. And in many ways, you can think about a CEO of a company, whether it's small, large, medium. They have shareholders to report to. They need to either report earnings to Wall Street. They have analysts who are looking at every move inside the company. They have investors they need to respond to. They have people that they are accountable to. Yes, in theory, politicians are also accountable to their populations, but typically those politicians can get away with saying whatever is expedient in that very moment. Whereas a CEO of a major company does not have that luxury. They need to tell it like it is, or risk, bad consequences for both their employees and their colleagues and shareholders and customers. But you touched on something which is so important, which is trust and confidence, and that's really what corporate diplomacy is all about. So much of just business is all about building trust and confidence, building trust with upstairs, building trust with downstairs, to your customers and to your board. And so stakeholders judge the quality of a company both on the sort of traditional commercial financial metrics, but also talking about political, social, cultural dimensions which go into this kind of 360 view of what a company is doing as a responsible corporate citizen. How are they engaged around the world? Are they promoting good policy? Are they helping, build up the communities in which they're operating? And that's such an important part of this as well. Next slide is just something interesting, and I think all of you have seen this. There's a lot of talk about this gentleman who's on screen right now, Mr. Elon Musk. But even beyond that, you look at there are some incredible examples of diplomat CEOs. Currently, again, not to make it too U.S. centric, but the American ambassador to Kenya is Meg Whitman. Meg was the CEO of HP for many years. I was going to say IBM. Thanks. And there's a number of ways in which the role of the CEO, the role of the modern CEO, is almost like the chief diplomat of your company. They're out there. They're participating in multilateral fora. They are engaging with global governments. Their peers, in many cases, are the heads of state. And like I said earlier, there is definitely a lot more acceptance now of doing bilaterals between heads of state and CEOs, whereas in the past that maybe wasn't such a practice. And so consumers now expect companies to speak out about political issues, which is a little bit of a quagmire. You want to talk a little bit about what kind of quagmire that kind of puts a company in? Not into it, but just generally.
Yeah, listen, I think there's a risk in doing it, and there's a risk in not doing it. And again, I think you have to be genuine for what your ability is to serve your employees, and what ability is to serve your customers. And I think that for a long time, it was, hey, we can pretend and we can say a lot of things, and as long as I tweet about this, then I'm safe and my employees won't care anymore. But I think now there's a cost to just virtue signaling, and not being able to walk the talk. And so I think that picking the issues where you really have a voice and where your voice is relevant is there. But I think if you ignore and you just kind of go to the Milton Friedman kind of view of, we're here to maximize shareholder value and that's it, I think you're missing kind of the modern business environment. And that, what we see from our employees and I've seen in other companies is that employees expect you as a business leader to speak out, to represent the diversity that they embody as employees, and to have a diverse kind of set of those things and recognize that. And so I think, again, to take a baseball analogy, you can't swing at every pitch, and maybe that would work in cricket as well. But you can't swing at every pitch, but you have to figure out which ones you can really hit and hit hard, right?
That's so well said. So bottom line, what is corporate diplomacy? It's building and maintaining relationships with external partners. That's simple. That's what we do in any case through the normal through the normal course of our businesses. What I'm proposing to you today is everybody in this room is in some form or fashion their own corporate diplomat, their own private sector diplomat. All of you are doing the work, whether it's advancing your business, advancing societal goals, SDGs, helping your communities, helping your government, serving your government. You are in some form or fashion engaged in diplomacy. And so each and every one, even citizen diplomats, and let's not brush over that. The importance of public diplomacy and citizen diplomacy is more important now than ever. We're living in an era where there's so much connectivity, and yet we are so polarized in so many different ways. And the ability to have a conversation, a real conversation that really understands what the other person is trying to say and what matters to them, is a lost art in many ways. Achieving harmony among a wide variety of stakeholders, another key aspect of corporate diplomacy. And then building a diverse network of trusted relationships to reach lasting solutions. That's what we alluded to in the earlier panel. It's was it make the roof while the sun is shining?
Fix your
Fixing the
phone,
roof, yeah. It's about looking ahead, not necessarily in a crystal ball, but understanding what are the aspects of your business that are going to be interfacing with the government or in this policy sphere at some point in the near future, and that how can you get ahead of those issues? And so, developing corporate diplomacy skills. What are the costs that could be avoided through a better relationship? What are the ways in which you could be proactive in thinking about all the things that your business needs now and not waiting until having an existential moment either weeks, months, years later down the line? And so having that insight, having those skills is vitally important for any business at any stage. And then what are the revenue gains that could be obtained by building relationships, by honing your diplomacy skills? That's something else that you can think about. It's not necessarily downside protection. There's a lot of upside that can be had as well through smart and effective engagement at any level. It doesn't matter you're working at your community level, you're working at the UN level, at the multilateral level, everywhere in between, you can make a difference and you can have positive gains for your business, for your community. So the next piece is a little bit of shameless self-promotion. So Meridian is a leader in corporate diplomacy. This is something we excel at. We have a number of training programs which are designed for entrepreneurs. They're designed for private sector executives. They're designed for people who are coming off of public sector jobs that need a better understanding of the landscape and the context in which they operate. Many times, Michael, you may have a few points on this, but a lot of times you may be a total genius at domestic policy and you have great relationships with members of Congress and senators, but then you get handed an international portfolio in your new job, and you need to figure out very quickly how to navigate all those international waters effectively for your company, and that can be a challenge sometimes.
Absolutely. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they were like, "Hey, okay, what are we going to do?" And we had I was in a previous company, but we had 150 employees there. We had thousands of customers. We had
Ukraine
about
or in Russia?
in Russia, and also we had different employees in Ukraine, and then the revenues coming out of there. So how do you quickly synthesize the information and work to do it? It's hard, and you rely on entities like Meridian to help kind of give that information and make sure you understand what other people are thinking about, because sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask, let alone the answers.
I have a cool example. I know we're almost out of time. I do want to save just a few minutes for questions and answer. One of our partners is the National Football League. I don't know if we have any football fans here, but we work with the NFL. What we do for the NFL is we help promote the rise of football in Germany, in Mexico. The NFL is now creating a combine, which is kind of for those who don't know, this is a system through which new players are entered and drafted into the league in Ghana. And they're developing a combine system and draft system directly in Ghana and helping them navigate those issues. A traditional American as it gets apple pie company looking to expand internationally, huge trillions of dollars in revenue, and helping them figure out how to navigate international waters. It's just a little slice of it. So hope you enjoyed the presentation and would love to get any of your questions and responses or reactions. Thank you. Questions? I know there must be so many. I saw so many nodding heads. Yes? No? Sir?
Yeah, what have you changed your mind about doing this work in the last year?
It's about understanding and meeting people where they're at instead of where you need them to be. I think that's really what I've seen is everybody has a different kind of frame of reference after COVID, and just being attuned to what people are looking for, what they need. That's something that we all need to be mindful of a little bit. I'm curious about your.
Listen, I would say don't underestimate your power to have a voice and to convene. It is easy to beat up on lobbyists. It's easy to beat up on big business, on corporations. There is almost zero policymakers who will say, you know what I hate? I hate entrepreneurs. I hate small businesses, right? They're the worst, right? But they will say, I hate big business. I hate large corporations. I hate all this stuff. But the power of an entrepreneur and a small business and of that community to say, I'm creating opportunity, I'm creating jobs, I'm creating innovation where I live, where I am. Everyone loves that, and policymakers want that to rub off on them, right? So they will hug you, they will embrace your ideas, they will embrace what you're doing. So don't underestimate your power in that, and don't let, again, it's intimidating to get into this arena, but understand that you have this power of being something that these policymakers want to associate with, want to promote, and want to benefit because it's good for them. And so don't underestimate that power. I think that's changed, and I don't think it's going to go away.